Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the stream. Happy Sunday. Looks like we have 3 folks watching. While we're kind of warming up here, I figured I'd start with a little bit of channel news, I guess you could call it. So there is a Discord that is associated with this channel, also a Facebook group, and I post kind of interchangeably between the two of them. Articles I post to Discord, I try to post to the Facebook group, and the Facebook group also to the Discord. Discord news, however, tomorrow I will be running my first Call of Cthulhu game on the Discord. It's already full, but it is kind of the kickoff to see if this is something I can and do enjoy doing, running for folks that I don't normally run with. And if that takes off, you can expect to see more. Other news, I have posted a query on the Discord for a possible other angle for gaming, for a gaming opportunity that may or may not speak to some folks, but I know I have enjoyed it in the past and is something that I have done effectively. And that is text-based role-playing for those who may have time to do a text thing, but maybe can't jump on camera or jump onto a full Discord. So this would be sort of a semi-real-time play by Discord text channel, sort of an RPG experience, very much typing and emoting the sort of things that you are doing with your character. It can, depending on how folks want to do it, it could be anything from very free form to actually you have a character sheet there and everything in front of you. But again, it's the sort of thing that's good for if you have one of those jobs where maybe you're able to keep another window open and a piece of paper on your table, or you've got little ones that you need to look after, but maybe you have 2 seconds to check your phone and see what's going on and respond. It's something that I thought might be fun. It is something that I would enjoy doing because I have one of those jobs where I can keep another window open and it doesn't require my 100% attention. And I do have the ability to kind of look back and forth. Excuse me, I didn't get to the mute button soon enough. That out of the way. Yeah, so I'm trying to get some activity on the Discord in terms of actual gaming experiences for myself, because I'd like to start gaming more than I am. Currently, I run a Monday game, 5th edition. I am in a 5th edition game on alternating Sundays. And, it's just one of those things where, I would like to try to get more gaming in. And again, I do apologize. I seem to have picked up a tickle. It's probably the dry air down here in my basement. All right, so that out of the way, I am here to talk about this game, Gamma World. All right, so if you know Gamma World at all, or don't, it is TSR's second foray into science fantasy role-playing. Blow the cover back up here again. But as you can see, what we have here is a sort of, post-apocalyptic blasted world with, humans up front with, their ray guns and their spacey helmets and stuff like that. This is not very representative of the game as a whole, but it is very evocative. It kind of jumps out of that Buck Rogers in the 25th century kind of a vibe there that was popular in the late 70s, early 80s. Gamma World comes out in 78. It follows on, and it was designed by James M. Ward. It follows on the tail of TSR's first science fantasy foray, which is almost as old as D&D. 2 years after D&D in 76, they come out with Metamorphosis Alpha, which is sort of mutant, apocalyptic fun on a spaceship that is traveling through space. on a destination somewhere, and something has gone wrong, and the people who have been in the sleeper pods and the biospheres and all that have changed. And so, yeah, and so then in 78 they come out with Gamma World, and this is the cover. Now, this is not the image that attracted me the most to the game. I kept seeing one particular ad in Dragon magazine that just really simultaneously induced a little bit of fear in my young brain. You figure 78, 79 is when I'm seeing this, so I am 8 or 7, and at 8 years old I was just getting into D&D, so I was starting to see ads in the Dragon magazines that were owned by the other players I knew. This is the picture that I kept seeing all over the place. This was the ad. This silhouetted, you know, dog wolf man. I think this is actually supposed to be a Ulfin or a Tharger. I can't remember what they're called. But basically, they have weird names for it. It's a null. Uh, and then some guy with his ray gun. But I don't know if it's just the way that it was silhouetted or the fact that at the same time I seem to remember that the book Wolfen was out, and it had a similar cover, at least the edition that I kept seeing around, and that always kind of spooked me out as well. But this is the one that really pulled me in. It was that combination of science fiction, yippee, cool ray gun madness, goodness, and just this primitive, beat down dog man in the background, and that really got me going. Um, so, um, Gamma World. Gamma World has had in its short life more editions than D&D is just working its way up to. 2011, I think it is, was the last edition of Gamma World that was produced, and that was its 7th edition. It transitioned through from first to second edition relatively quick. From 78 when the first edition came out to 83 for the second edition, and the first and second editions are nearly identical in gameplay. It's just that the second edition was what a true second edition should be in my mind, and that is a representation of the game, a cleanup of the rules, and just a general solidification of what the first edition presents. First edition Gamma World has been commented as being nearly unplayable to some people, especially if you've never picked up a role-playing game. Now, Gamma World itself is born out of D&D mechanics. It shares essentially the same 6 attribute scores, and then it started to play with the system. And I think this is one of the standout and important things in the history of gaming that really is worth noting for Gamma World, is that Gamma World, and I believe Metamorphosis Alpha, I don't have a lot of experience with that game, but Gamma World starts to tinker with the D&D rule system and see what it can do. And if you're an old school D&D player, you'll remember earlier books, like even I think the DMG for first edition has Gamma World to D&D conversion charts in there, because they were already thinking about this science fantasy element aspect. And Gamma World never pretends to be science fiction. It declares itself right on the tin from the very beginning. You can see right here up here in the corner, science fantasy role playing. That's what it's trying to say. So we get an early experience of a science fantasy setting, and because of that, the game has been described as D&D with ray guns or D&D with mutants. And while that is not incorrect, it is unfair because it plays differently. Some of the base conceits are there. You're still going out and exploring, often from a safe haven, and then you're looking for treasure. In this case, though, that treasure is artifacts from the pre-apocalyptic world, or just resources to survive with. A lot of time your home base may not be as safe as it might be in a D&D game. It could be. You could have a well-established village or community that's in an enclave in an old piece of a city that remains. You might have water. You might have even power, depending. Um, but you are going out into the world to find things, to find stuff, to find people. That's another thing is in Gamma World, the base assumption is that a lot of your characters or the party itself may be the only people that you've ever met. You've come together, you've banded together in a loose little survival group, but it's different than like the grim future realism that we get nowadays. It's that weird Gonzo weirdness. Like your group might be a pure strain human, a human with no mutations, um, a mutant human, a mutant animal, and in later editions, even a mutant plant was allowed. Mutant plants are in there from the very beginning, but they don't become a player race, I think, until like third or fourth edition. But it's really easy to backtrack that because the plant mutation tables are there early on. If you go with Mutant Future, which is an OSR version of Gamma World, you're even seeing things like androids and robots as characters, which could be fun. But I feel like much like D&D starts to feel a little less interesting the more races you pull into it, at least at one time. Same thing with Gamma World. I feel like if you keep it to that core conceit of uh, mutant animals, mutant humans, maybe mutant plants, and then pure strain humans, then everything else out there is just weird and wacky and bizarre. And when you run into robots, they're special. When you run into mutant animals, they're special. And it keeps that isolated mutant apocalypse fun going. Okay, so I'm going to take a real quick moment to say hello to the 4 folks who are watching. If you are here, please shout out. Let me know who you are. And thank you for coming. So I mentioned earlier that Gamma World went through a lot of editions. The editions of Gamma World varied pretty heavily. Gamma World seems to have always been TSR's test bed, or a opportunity for for TSR and then later WotC to express its new system. Here are the first 4 editions. With Gamma World first edition up in the upper left, second edition upper right, third edition lower left, and fourth edition bottom right. So, what's the difference on all these? All of these are the TSR versions. I have played the first 3, but I don't really like any past the first 2. So, as I mentioned earlier, 1 and 2 are really a good example of a first edition and a solid, real second edition. You can tell by the trade dress on Gamma World second edition, it comes out at about the Beck-Me time. And the presentation in the books tends to be very Beck-Me-ish as well. It was a box set. It had more stuff. Well, actually, first edition Gamma World was also a box set because it came out around the same time as like the original BX stuff. The components in second edition are much improved over first edition. They did a weird thing in second edition that can be a little jolting when you're first reading through it. They bolded things a lot, bolded and all capped things a lot. In fact, not only did they bold and cap them, but as you're reading through them, they would change the font on these bolded cap things to a very impact like font, but it's not. I will call it the Gamma font because it was consistent with like a lot of their Gamma World trade font. So you'll read it. Keywords would jump out at you. Now, mind you, keywording like this is a relatively new development in gaming now. And this second edition is coming out in '83, and they're already playing with, bolding and keywording stuff. And it worked on subsequent read throughs, and it helped when you're skimming the rule books. But when you're first reading the rules, it was a little jarring, and could definitely throw you out of the rhythm of reading. But yeah, once you got used to it, it was there. So those are the first four. The third edition comes out at about the time of the Great Star Frontiers debacle, as I will call it, where they attempted to write the second edition Star Frontiers, utilizing the nifty new mechanic that had been brought out in Marvel Superheroes role-playing game Face Rip, which is the Universal Table. This became TSR's darling at the time, and so we're talking 86 here. And so Marvel Superheroes came out in 84. And this sort of really changed the gameplay. And also Gamma World is indeed what kind of sealed, partially what sealed the death of Star Frontiers. So that's another story, and I think I actually explained that in the Star Frontiers video I did. But yeah, so instead of having a very D&D-esque system that with some sci-fi overlays, and I'll talk a little bit about the system differences a little bit later, you end up with a completely new system of column shifts, and that really sort of played out differently. Now, Gamma World 4th edition never really touched it. I know my brother bought it back in the day, my little brother. 4th edition came out in 1992, and don't know much about it. I don't remember much about it. All I remember is it was really fiddly with components in the set. And I know that there was at one point like it even used different systems. Like the 2000 version was an alternity system, and 2003's used D20 Modern. And then they later on did a 2010 edition. That was the last version. That was 7th edition. Interestingly enough, they have always changed up through the editions. They've kind of updated the cause of the apocalypse to be sort of contemporary, I guess. Initially it is a very fun future, in my opinion. It's not retrofuturism like Fallout. The whole story is that Earth reaches this golden age of technology where we have like miracle science. We've got androids and flying cars and you know um, replication machines and robots helping us in all of our day to day. And then there is a big war because there are people who don't like that big modern society, and so they start a big scuffle, and it blows the planet up. Um, Tangentially, Metamorphosis Alpha has, in some instances, been linked, canon-wise, world-wise, universe-wise, to Gamma World, as the ship that you're on in Metamorphosis Alpha may or may not be one of the ships that was sent away from the dying Earth to try and save humanity, which is fun because you could potentially link a Metamorphosis Alpha campaign by having them return to Earth or something like that. But for that matter, you could play Gamma World and have them find out that they're on a spaceship. Oh my God, we're not on Earth at all. We're on a spaceship. But yeah. So, anyways, the cause of the apocalypse gets updated as the editions go along. There is you'll see that we get was it in the alternative version, it's an alien arrival and then humanity's nuclear response that causes the apocalypse. So now we have aliens on Earth, which I believe was always a possibility in the original editions, but not so spelled out in the background. And then the D20 modern version was nanotechnology and AI went rampant, and that's what caused our apocalypse. And then the 2010 version was really tying into current events because the activation of the Large Hadron Collider caused multiple realities to exchange features in an event known as the Big Mistake. So they were being topical there. All right, so that is Gamma World. Real quick, I want to talk about some of the other wonderful appeals of Gamma World, just as far as the world goes. As you can see, these covers here, these first 4 editions, they're all very much consistent to the vision of Gamma World. In fact, the second edition is probably the most accurate interpretation of what you're going to be playing in Gamma World. And let me see if I can pull this more center. If you look at that that cover, we got a giant killer robot and a couple of primitively armed individuals in the foreground. That's a little bit more what you're going to be dealing with when you're playing Gamma World. Most often, very seldomly are you going to be walking around with uniformed equipment like the guys on the first edition, and this fully equipped cyber warrior in the fourth edition here is probably an advanced character. And I don't know what this guy on the third edition is. If anything, those the first edition and third edition covers are more indicative of the sorts of encounters you'll run into, where you might run into one of the prevailing threads throughout Gamma World is secret societies, and I really feel like this is them kind of jamming off of the Beneath the Planet of the Apes kind of a concept. But you'll run into these various powerful groups that have advanced technology or have accumulated technologies. But so the art in Gamma World was really good. I really love the first edition here. Again, here we have a pretty well-equipped adventurer with strange plants and stuff around him. All the usual suspects for D&D art are in these early editions. We even get Errol Otis doing stuff. This is a famous one. This is the mutant semi-flying hippo with antennas that's jumping over a fence here. And then let's see, we've got I believe this is the illustration that accompanies their paragraph on useless characters, because this guy is just like no hands, is all kinds of weird joints, and that's a thing that they even talk about in the rules, like generating a character that can't be played. Here's an example of a mutant plant improving himself. Here's one of the Errol Otis ones. This is inside cover art for the module Legion of Gold, I think it is. The Legion of Gold is a module that features one of those powerful organizations, but also has intelligent mutant ants. And you can see we got this Errol Otis adventurer in there with his ray gun blasting they call them bugums, is what these mutant ants are called. Here's an example of just a mutant monster you might run into. Some sort of combination of zoological features there. This is from the second edition. This is the illustration for androids, and this features a worker, a soldier, and a thinker android. Very standout piece of art in my mind. Pretty sure that's an Elmore piece. Yeah, it's Elmore. His signature's down here. And this art here is very consistent with, I think, a lot of that late 70s, early 80s interpretations of human form robots. Pretty sure this is a third edition piece of art. We can see a little bit more of the Road Warrior bleeding into this, but I really like this piece of art and its combination of tech levels. We got this big horde mounted on motorcycles and horses with their punk rock stuff and their spears and their limited number of guns. And this is really kind of another good example of what an advanced enclave would be in Gamma World. Robots. This is the second edition interpretation of the Death Machine. I'm pretty sure this is the second edition. Death Machines are the dragons of Gamma World. These things are pre-fall war machines that roam around and will kill you. They're armed with the best weapons, and the best you can hope for is to run into one that's got its motive system damaged, and so it can't move. So it's basically a bunker. It went through a few interpretations. Like I said, this is the second edition version. Here's the original first edition. You can tell that there's definitely a change in the art not just in technical aspects, but just in interpretation. Um, this first edition one is very simple, very Flash Gordon-y, very Buck Rogers-y, and this second edition one actually it looks like a machine. Of course, it's an Elmore, and therefore it has Elmore's trademark kind of grittiness to technology. This is, I think, the third edition of the Death Machine, which kind of falls halfway between the two. If you think about it, it's an egg, um, but it's got very much more defined and specific mechanics, but it's still a little bit more fanciful, like that first edition one. All right, mechanic wise, we'll get back to some components. Here's the first edition map of the United States. Very basic, as you can tell. Early TSR hex map. By third edition, I think it's I think it's the second or third edition. We get this very much more colorful, and this also came out. This, I believe, was a fold-out double-sided map, and it had like some regional maps of like New York on it or something like that. So that's good. All right, mechanic wise. So one of the big things that Gamma World does, and I'm not getting any comments, which is really rare. So I'm gonna go ahead and check the YouTube, make sure I didn't disable comments somehow. Just a moment. So please stand by. Boop, boop, boo, do, 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 do. Because it's very weird. I mean, we got people watching, but nobody's saying anything. Let me take a just make sure I didn't disable the comments somehow. Maybe I didn't save it right to where it's like not kids. Oh, it's made for kids. That's why. Disable the comments. Sorry about that, folks. If you have been watching and haven't seen the comments, that is all on me. Those comments sure should be reactivated. So shout out. Let me know you're there. Be nice. And let's hear from you. All right. So let me pull back up where I was. Sorry about that, folks. It happens. I went in to modify some of the descriptions on the stream and seemed to have disabled that comment function. So if the comments are now showing available for you, please go ahead and make a comment. That way I know they are working. And let me know who's here. I mean, you are the people in my neighborhood, to quote Sesame Street there. Ah, yes, Mage's Musings. Thank you. And welcome, Grumpy. Uh, yes, Grumpy, the one time you made the stream, the comments are borked. All right. So cool. Well, thank you guys for showing up, and thank you for being patient with me. There is no way you could have let me know because the comments were broken. Yeah, that's a good comment too. A good point. People didn't catch this. You may need to reload the page to see the comments. So go ahead and do that. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into talking. They must be doing it because I dropped down to 3 folks. Hey, RW Bishop, how's it going? Yes, welcome. All right. So the mechanics of Gamma World. So first and foremost, like I said, you had the same 6 core attributes, although wisdom was changed to mental strength because Gamma World has psionics built into it. They don't call them psionics; they're referred to as mental mutations, but effectively they are psychic powers. So vis-a-vis magic by any other name, but you know, mental strength became your score for that. All right. You now taking a piss in Discord. I see how you are. Let's see. Yes. I see. Yeah. No, I wasn't checking the Discord. All right. Cool. Well, Fun. All right. Well, I try to minimize my windows when I'm doing this so I don't get distracted because the old ADHD is a bad thing. So, in addition to your 6 attributes, you had, of course, mutations, which would range from really useful to really crappy. The mutations were both good and bad. It was very possible to get a character with just absolute craptastic mutations. But in the grandest of old school stylings, it was always fun to try and figure out how to make those crappy powers useful. Like, if your character had a horrible stench that he made, how do you make that a useful thing in a game? It's going to certainly depreciate your stealth abilities, but it's something you can use possibly. If you're creative and have a good imagination. Hit points was another place where they really veered off. So your starting hit points were actually really high potentially, and highly variable. And that is because Gamma World was supposed to be dangerous. In fact, it's possible that Gamma World may be more dangerous to starting characters than older versions of D&D. Even with the massive amounts of hit points, if you run into, say, an android who's carrying a black ray gun, which is a weapon in the game, he could kill you in one shot, even if you have a lot of hit points. So your starting hit points are determined by taking your constitution score and rolling a number of d6 equal to that and totaling them up. So if you had a high constitution, you would potentially have a lot of hit points to start with. And then you gained hit points very slowly as you played. I'm not going to go into that too much. Another place where the game varied was and of course, I'm talking about first and second edition. Yeah, grumpy creatures also had a huge amount of hit points too. But you weren't tending to run into huge groups of creatures, even when you ran into the sort of pack dwelling or tribal creatures. There were usually just a few of them. But another place that the game varied from D&D is in how it handled armor class and to hit. So because Gamma World takes place in a setting with a tech base that runs from the Stone Age all the way to the hyper futuristic, they developed a concept called weapon class. Now, weapon class is not a foreign term. It's you know it, but in the context of Gamma World, it is effectively the tech level of your weapon. And so you had this chart. And this chart is not all that complicated. In fact, I'm going to remove myself from the image here. And so this is the attack matrix. So along the top, you have the weapons damage class from 1 to 16, and then the defender's armor class on the left. Um, uh, yeah, I forgot about this, and like I said, it's been a while, but yeah, there were some modifications that were done in the second edition to make pure strain humans uh, more appealing to play because you didn't get any mutations. So they came up with the idea was that pure strain humans were just generally more robust because somehow they managed to stay just human despite all the mutant future-y stuff going on. But anyways, as you can see on the attack matrix here, you would take the defender's armor class on the left and combine, cross-reference it with the attack matrix, and that's your base to hit. With the weapons attack class, attacking weapon class. And so, like Thaco, this is one of those things that you just kind of get used to and start learning to play. But it was a really great way to just have that widespread uh, damage style. I'm going to pull up here real quick. I've got a example of the weapons from this is, I believe, the second edition weapon chart. That's one thing that is definitely going to be a returning theme. First edition was very hard to reference. It was hard to read. It was very early TSR. They hadn't really got their stride. Second edition comes out during the Beckme era, and you can clearly see that they've started to figure things out. But if you look at these damage levels, so we got here a battle axe does 1d8. But if we go down here to a concussion bomb, fusion rifles, you see these asterisks. That's because these things all had special features. But like you'll see, for example, the fusion bomb, 15d10. This is a good question. What would a campaign arc look like, roughly, or an enemy other than mutations? So campaign arcs can vary. Your campaign arc could merely be survival. I really feel that Gamma World lends itself very well to an open table type of a setup, where players come in and go and kind of play when they can. You can start yourself out with a big bad guy. I know Legion of Gold is essentially the keep on the borderlands for Gamma World. It gives you a home enclave, which is a stronghold run by a baron who has you start doing some minor tasks around the region, and then leads up to dealing with the Legion of Gold directly. And so that's a good example of an arc, a pretty typical arc for Gamma World. You start out at a low power level, you deal with smaller threats, a meta threat comes up, and then you go deal with that. And but with Gamma World, it's also very much, it lends itself well to rinsing and repeating that without it kind of feeling tropey, because that's the landscape of Gamma World. The landscape of Gamma World is a wrecked world, where there are little bright spots here and there, little leftovers. I know the second edition, I think it's second edition. No, it's the first edition Game Master screen, has a mini adventure where you flat out just go to a spaceport. You go to the spaceport and you're trying to see what's there, and you run into this. So the dungeon experience is very alive in Gamma World, and like I was saying earlier, Gamma World has been commented on as being D&D with mutants, and while it's not wrong, I still think it's unfair. But you swap out dungeons with ruins, and which is not all that much of a switch out if you think about it. It's just those ruins are often high tech, and often include a lot of weird stuff to the from the point of view of the characters. So it is very D&D. I mean, it's hard to describe Gamma World and not have it sound like just like D&D. But I think that's kind of a positive for Gamma World, because I think that the fact that it plays similar to D&D makes it accessible for D&D players. I do prefer Gamma World over, say, some of the newer OSR versions of it, because while it is built out of D&D, it still feels different enough to where it is in the way that it plays that it's not D&D. Whereas Mutant Future is literally BX with ray guns and mutants. I mean, they don't even pretend to be anything different. In fact, the monster manual for Mutant Future is, oh look, here's pigmen. Oh look, here's a brain flare. They just flat out just drop a black pudding in there. I mean, while that's a slime monster is not something that you wouldn't have in Gamma World. Just putting a D&D monster in their whole cloth just seems lazy. Gamma World has some things that are familiar, um, but it always tries to give them new names and new lore. A lot of the naming conventions for Gamma World are spoofs on English. They're broken English. Like the Badger men that are in there are called Batters. Um, there are rabbits in there that are mutant rabbits in there that are called Hoops. Um, yeah, the Cryptic Alliances are what I was mentioning before with the secret societies. Uh, those are definitely there, and they and tying back to R.W. Bishop's comment, that is also a good source of play and campaign arc for a game would be to bring in the Cryptic Alliances because they have different motives, and you could easily have a scenario where uh, the PCs are working for a Cryptic Alliance against another Cryptic Alliance, or maybe don't even know they're working for a Cryptic Alliance. Maybe they have a third party, quest giver who is the one. And kind of this is the holy grail of the campaigns. I mean, there's even a choose your own adventure book set in Gamma World that um, is a pretty good example of. Honestly, I think is a really fair example of like what a campaign would be like, or at least an adventure. Unradiated zone, make it my Alamo, so to speak. Yes, they exist. They're rare and they're often spoken for, but that is kind of the golden goose of the game. The kind of the holy grail is to try and find something like that and set up your own stronghold. And that's another thing. I mean, the game does lend itself well to a sort of eventual stronghold play as your PCs meet other NPCs um, and uh, maybe gather them into a community. The game does have charisma with the same follower mechanics as early D&D did, so it is definitely expected that you are going to have some additional folks with you. Um, yeah, you got to love the fission bomb here with its 40 d10, or for the clean one, and the dirty one is 60 d10 damage. Now it does weigh 50 kilograms, but yeah. So this is the weapon table. I also wanted to show where is it? I have Here's the armor table. You'll notice it goes from no armor to leather armor to inertia armor. Uh, Fancy sci-fi name for effectively low grade ballistic, like ballistic protection. Furs and heavy skins, force shields, fiber armor, energized armor, uh, duralloy shield, chainmail barding, and chainmail. And this isn't even all of it, because there are also things like power armors and stuff that you can get in from the higher tech enclaves. Um, I feel that Gamma World is sort of it's one of those gems of gaming history that is really worth your time if you are inclined to play science fiction, sci fantasy. It's definitely worth getting into. Um, it's more science fantasy, obviously. Um, it also has fun things like this. I forgot about this. Let me pull this up here real quick. Um, because it's not just about finding the technology, it's about figuring out how it works. um, and so uh, this is something, if you're familiar with D&D, you will have likely have seen this in an AD&D in Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which I believe borrowed heavily from Gamma World. I would almost say that the you could you could write it into your game that the spaceship that crashed on uh, on your D&D world was originally from the Gamma world setting. The robots are identical, the weaponry is almost identical, the tech chart is identical. And while yes mages, yikes, uh this is not as bad as it looks because it really is a flow chart. So it's a lot of options, but you're not going to be you're not having to navigate unguided through all of these. You really just have to find out, A, what kind of equipment you're using. Like chart A is for pistols, rifles, energy weapons, grenades, bombs, missiles, basically combat equipment. And it's very simple. And I appreciate that because those are going to be pretty straightforward. No, that's a very simple chart because it always leads to I don't care. Um, and then we have, of course, offensive armor. That's an interesting one right there. Offensive armor. That's going to be your power armor, things like that. But you'll also look down here. This is kind of a nice peek into some of the tech that you have. You have combustion vehicles, but then you have like turbine cars, hover cars, flit cars. Those are the flying ones. Let's see, rejuve chambers. There, you don't have a lot of healing potions, but there is healing tech. Um, let's see. Let me take a look here. And then we have environmental car, bubble car, permanent cybernetics installation, think tanks, life rays. This is your really advanced stuff. Life rays are fun. It's like it's a cure wounds spell in the form of a tool. Um, Again, science fantasy. It's fun. You're very rarely gonna find this stuff. And a lot of times when you find it, it's broken. So your game could be cool. I found this thing. Do I even know it's a gun? Uh, and if I find out that it's a gun and I try to use it, what do I do when it's got no power pack or it's broken? So now you have a quest to you're gonna hold on to it maybe. You might be using that rifle as a club for a while, but you're eventually hoping as a player, especially, that you're going to find an energy pack to power it, or you're going to find that part to fix it. Um, you might find a car and then hook up a beast of burden to it and ride around in it, Mad Max style. Um, and eventually, though, oh no, I found an engine. Next thing you know, you've got a car that you're driving around in. Um, I know that we found in playing the games back in the day, we found one suit of power armor um, for the whole party, and that was ridiculous because it was so hard to use without eventually either killing yourself trying to figure it out, but also it was just one of those like you didn't want to wear it all the time because you only had a limited number of uses out of it before it ran out of power. Well, and beyond this, Grumpy, if you remember, not only is it broken or missing the power pack, do you even know what it is? Because depending on who your character is, you may have never seen tech. You may have been living in some sort of agrarian, Stone Age community where your best. They actually talk about it in Gamma World. The crossbow is the pinnacle of technology that people can make in the current state of things. I think I forgot to mention early on, but the base start point for Gamma World is 200 years after the apocalypse. Um, if you're ever trying to elevator pitch Gamma World, the best thing you can do to anybody of my generation and the generation of many of the folks I know who are on here is just Thundar the Barbarian, the game. Um, Anything in Thundar that's magic is generally expressed in Gamma World as mental mutations, psionics. Uh, Exactly. This chainsaw's not cutting well, or oh, maybe it needs some oil. It has a motor. Exactly. Um, but yeah, and that's the fun of it. So in D&D, when you're playing D&D, you're playing from that base position of, generally speaking, your characters know that there are strange things out there, and but the base world is, generally speaking, one they can live in without adventuring forth. They don't have to adventure. Adventurers in D&D are generally adventurers by choice. Your backstory may vary, um, but it's something they've gone to do that deviates from a relatively livable day to day. I mean, social class and medieval medievalism's withstanding. Gamma World sort of notches that up a bit and says, okay, your default is very likely just getting by, if even getting by. And adventuring is less of a choice and more of a necessity. Um, because you do know that the world is dangerous and full of bad guys. Also, in Gamma World, if you have anything, more than likely somebody else wants what you have, and any stability is only temporary and can only be guaranteed by finding the resources to preserve that stability, whether that is a more defensible place to live, the tools and technologies to do it, allies and friends. Um, there is a lot that is out there to find. I'm gonna pull up real quick because I feel like just some images are not gonna cut it, at least for my. So I'm gonna bring up the second edition rules. I've got a PDF of this. So it was procured back in the day before um, we knew that these things were purchasable. So it is available on drive-through if you want. But I'm going to kind of real quickly, I'm going to zip through this here. Just kind of, here's the ad for it. But I want to go ahead. This is the second edition, and you'll see what I was talking about with that bolding. Not just at headers, but in the middle of text. It has that very Beck me wall of text thing going on. But what I wanted to do, and this is all the mutations here, what I wanted to pull up is the bestiary and kind of look over some of the monsters. You see some folks riding around in what's left of a tank. There's that android picture. Okay, so androids. Let's see, what do we got? We got arcs, which is actually what's on that picture that terrified me as a child. They're effectively dogmen, so kind of nulls. And then you have batters, which are digger folk, which is the one thing I really like about um, the second edition is that first of all, it gave us a clearer presentation of monsters than first edition did, and it also gave us attribute score ranges. So it was very possible to make an NPC off of just about any monster if you wanted to. But you'll see we got like humanoid species, but then we have things like dragon bugs and barrel neps, which are death fish. And I like the fact that the, their name is followed by this parenthetical description of what they're known as or what that means. Like we have barrel neps, which are death fish, and then we have burleps, which is sweet pads. Um, we have gamma moths, and you know, I like this. These are addercops, which is like the post-apocalyptic folks knew what an ettercap was but mispronounced it. Bloodbirds. The brute horses, basically big old draft horses that are, giant horses that are running around. You've got cloud worms. These things are nasty. Blights. Um, but yeah, you've got Karens, which are the dark emperors. Can you say Skeksis? Um, and we've got these ones are always funny. Centisteeds. And these are massively pedal insect horse hybrids. Just all sorts of fun stuff. Dabbers, which are raccoon dudes. Um, Lots of fish in this game. I was always surprised by how many fish are in this game, and it wasn't until later I realized that because water is a resource that players are often going to be looking for, they wanted to make sure that sources of water were likely going to be um, dangerous. Fleshins, the flying fish. They even have these guys, the fens. They're psychic manfish. Um, those guys are badass. Grens, which are green men, they're plant humans. Um, Hissers, these guys are fun. You look at they have standard mutations of mass mind, sonic blast, and telepathy. So they were like psychic snake men. It's almost like they put Yuan Ti into Gem World. Hoppers. I also like the fact that they had a number of mounts: brute horses, centisteeds, hoppers. They wanted to make sure that you had mutant things to ride around on, and that's not even the craziest ones. Here's the hoops. These guys have a weird ability. Um, oh man, did they get rid of it? Oh, that sucks. So in first edition, hoops had this horrible ability to turn metal into rubber at touch. So here you are. I've got my ray gun. I found it. It's all cool. I know what I'm doing. I've got this blasty thing. Rabbit touches it. Now you can't use it anymore because it's turned into rubber. Um, that would suck. They were the rust monsters of Gamma World, basically. Um, Weird stuff like plant lizards, which you can also ride. Um, they managed to find a way to put pixies into the game. Yeah, it's just like all sorts of stuff, all sorts of bugs. These guys, the Orlans. So the Orlans are badass. These two-headed, four-armed guys, because they wield four-handed swords in combat. It's insane. And let's see, we also got these guys, Pinettos. It's funny because Pinettos are um, riding cacti. It's a way to put it in they actually feature in the Choose Your Own Adventure. You're riding around on Pinettos. And then there's Podogs. Podogs are just giant dogs in the game. Let's see. Thought Masters, Land Sharks. Some things are just going to stay forever. That's a Gygaxian monster right there. He's like, we're going to keep it forever. Sleeths, yeah, lizard men. Um, Wardens are, um, God, look at that list of mutations. I'm sorry if I seem a little surprised. It's been a long time since I looked at the second edition rules. Heightened brain, talent, heightened intelligence, mental shield, mental control of body, genius capability, scientific, telepathy, telekinesis, and will force. So you've got your fuzzy little psychic gnomes out there. Hey, Hunger, welcome to the stream, Talking Gamma World. But yeah, you can see the monsters just went on and on, and then that's just what was in the base rule book for, and most of those monsters are in the first edition, but they just get better presentation in second edition. Here's a section on cryptic alliances, and each one of them has their own little symbol. And robots get their own section because there's a whole thing on programming robots. If you can find them, you can go ahead and try to reprogram them if you have the knowledge. stuff for the DM or GM, whatever you want to call it, for doing robot designs. So that's cool. Here's a bunch of pre-done robots. Death machines are horrible. 150 D8 is its hit dice. 150 D8. Oh yeah, that is another thing, mages. Elmore art is all through the second edition. I don't know who did the first edition stuff. Probably the same teenagers they hired to do the early D&D stuff. But the only thing is, like, you go through this great looking book, right? You know, with all of its fun art, and then you get to this character sheet, which is just boring. Look at this. That is the most flat, uninspiring character sheet I have ever seen. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's clear. It'd be easy to use. And then you get through the adventure booklet, which is like the little map for the adventures that come in the box. Pretty decent, like second, third generation D&D art, D&D stuff. Let's see. The adventure booklet has more stuff in it. Talks about forming a party, how to use the adventure, marching through Allegheny, points of interest, little overview gazetteer of the starting area. Yeah, it's funny, Grumpy. That is a great point. In a game that is all about crazy mutants and stuff, they didn't provide a space to draw your character. I mean, if ever there was a game that just invited the artist in the gaming group to just go to town drawing everybody's character, is this one. Yeah, it's just kind of silly. Let's see. So treasure tables. I'm just kind of flipping through this so you guys can see kind of what's in that second edition. I am irritated though because the first edition is available in a print on demand on drive-through, which is cool. The second edition is not, but the third edition is. I don't know if they just don't have a good scan. Here's a good example. This is the mutations. This is how many mutations there are in the game. This one on the left is the standard mutations table, and then they have the short little plant mutation table. So yeah, there's a lot of mutations in the game. So tons of fun. They also had your poison matrix and your radiation matrix. If folks have played D&D, what do those look like? Those look like turning tables to me. But so it should be, and they even gave you encounter tables, which is really nice. This is all second edition. I feel the best version of this game is your second edition in terms of reference and playability. You're probably right, RW Bishop. It's very likely supposed to represent the tech look, but I'll show you the third edition character sheet in a little bit, and it does it does the same thing, but is more creative. I do like that this box set has all of these wonderful charts and tables at the very end. Gosh, you've got your movement rates for your unburdened, burdened, and heavily burdened characters. Your melee attack matrix, your physical attack matrix, attacker's hit dice. So attacker's hit dice is, I mentioned earlier that we've got the attack weapon class. Because we're dealing with a lot of creatures that are not armed but are also powerful, they do have an attacker's hit dice chart that allows you to reference monsters that aren't using gear. I really do like that. Let's see. There's also a mental attack matrix, which defender's mental strength versus attacker's mental strength. So if you're familiar with, I think that's actually almost the old psionics. It's been a while since I looked at the psionics from D&D. But also because this is being presented to us in the early 80s in America, they did give us a handy dandy table of metric conversions because the game is presented in metric because everybody knows that metric is the measurement system of the future. Here again is our weapon table. Everything from clubs to lasers. Charisma score. Mage's musings. I'm sure you'll recognize the the stuff on the charisma score here for what we got as far as, you know, you've got your maximum followers, morale adjustment, reaction adjustment, all good. This is a fun one. They had a charisma table modifier. So if you are let's see. So if you're a pure strain human, you have no modifier against pure strain humans. However, if you're a humanoid, it modifies, and then you've got, then mutated animals. So pure strain human, mutant human, or something similar. I thought that was a nice, handy little add-in, because if you're going to be using those charisma reaction tables, and I'm gonna call you out. Mage's Musings has demonstrated just how absolutely enjoyable those can be in his review caps on his channel. So go to Mage's Musings, subscribe, like, share if you haven't. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, this is why I like Gamma World over, say, like I was saying before, Mutant Future. Gamma World is D&D esque, but it takes the time and effort to make itself stand out a bit. Whereas just taking D&D and filing the serial numbers off and throwing mutants in there is not as enticing to me. That's true. Uh, but I think that's applying too much real world logic to it, and that's the one trap that you can get into easily in a setting like Gamma World. Gamma World is supposed to be Gonzo sci fantasy. It is probably the most specifically Gonzo game that's been Gonzoed, besides maybe, yeah, I think I would say it's probably more Gonzo than Paranoia, because Paranoia is actually pretty consistent in its base elements. So Paranoia is wacky and madcap, but no, I wouldn't say Gonzo. No, and this would be something that the DM could throw in, but I feel like the base rule conceit, the rules concession there is that mutant animals see themselves as different than humans, and therefore, you are a mutant animal, therefore you are of a similar order of being to me than the humans. Rivalries are always going to exist between species and stuff, but then again, with everybody being mutations, and the fact that a mutant mouse might be 8 feet tall, is he really going to care about cats? And it's also, so I would say take nature off the table, but you could also play up those tropes as well. Let's see what else is here. Oh, the general equipment guide is also very good. Very clearly displayed. Artifact complexity table. I think in second edition, I believe they streamlined the figuring things out, but I'm not overly familiar with that. There's a nice loot table here. And it varies depending on where you are, which is nice. So Deathlands and Ruins. Deathlands are anything out there in the wilderness, and the ruins are, of course, ruins. Installations are any sort of installation, spaceport, command center, military bunker, anything like that. But you'll notice all the really high tech stuff is more likely to be found in installations. The variation here gives you reasons to go places. Now, I do find it interesting that these loot tables are still pretty generous, and I feel like second edition may have notched up the chances of finding stuff a little higher than it is in first edition. But then again, if you're playing this game, you probably want to find the stuff, but you also then have to still figure it out. But I'm looking over this, and I'm like, okay, we got simple things like a plastic crate, but we also have like all these atomic energy cells, vibro daggers, hydrogen cells, slug throwers. I'm gonna have to venture that this is probably, if you found special loot, or at least I would rule it as if you found special loot. Um, because really, I don't think Gamma World would be amazingly fun if everybody just started getting piled up on high tech gizmos all the time. The armored table. This is the full armored table. Total carapace, chainmail, force shield, plastic armor, powered scout armor, powered plate armor, transport tables. So they really went well, all out with, I think, with that second edition. The second edition is a very solid version. And here's our, you can see that slanted English, Pacific Z, almost any C sound in Gamma World, or not C, but S sound in Gamma World is pronounced with a Z. So Seattle became Seattle, or Zatal, I believe is what it was. The Zalt Z is over there where Salt Lake used to be. So here's your United States. This is Allegheny. And here is Pittsburgh. It's an outdoor adventure map for the city of Pittsburgh. And you could probably play an entire campaign here. Going back to R.W. Bishop's earlier question about a campaign arc, you could probably play an entire campaign and never leave this. You could never leave this city. I mean, there's just so much going on in a single city if you think about modern urban stuff. So anyways, that is the second edition box set. We're at the hour here. I kind of think I covered most of the important things about Gamma World. I am going to real quick pull up the third edition box set just to show it off. But while I'm doing this, gonna go ahead and start closing out the stream. You'll see here that third edition keeps that sort of Beck Me trade dress. Lot less art and reusing a lot of the art. But in fact, I think third edition pretty much reuses all of the art. They did come back with an artifact examination chart again, so maybe that didn't disappear. The character sheet is still that blase version, and then here's that action table. So this is the face rip universal table coming back into it, and then there's the adventure book. It's funny, this is old first edition art, but yeah, what do I think about Gamma World? I think honestly, Gamma World is probably one of the most underappreciated TSR products that was ever created. Cobalt 60, Damnation Alley, a lot of John. Well, yeah, I would say any of the 70s or late 70s, early 80s, and even some of the 1960s. Logan's Run fits perfectly into Gamma World. It does. You could easily have Logan's Run be an enclave of pure strain humans, and you could retheme it to where it's not about living long, it's about living healthy. And so like when they hit a certain rad level or a disease level or whatever, then they had to die. But that would fit in there well. A lot of the Buck Rogers in the 25th century stuff, especially the old TV series that dealt with the Earth outside of the controlled cities and stuff. Really good stuff there. Hell, Land of the Lost would be fun. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can borrow. Like I said, Thundar is a great example. Stuff like the Herculoids. The Herculoids could be Gamma World. I mean, what do they got? They got a mutated rhinoceros, a mutated gorilla, a couple of slime creatures, a lightning dragon lizard thingy, and they're all a bunch of pure strain humans living out there with their animal friends. So there's a lot of inspiration out there. Hell Comes to Frogtown. That's a good example. Judge Dredd is actually good fodder too. You could make a case. I mean, I would say that Judge Dredd, the Cursed Earth stuff for Judge Dredd is useful, but also I think that you could borrow some of the keynotes from Mega City to deal with how like a cryptic society might run an enclave. Um, I mean, there's probably even stuff from Rifts and stuff you can borrow, but I feel like if you the more modern the sources that you pull from, the less you retain that character that makes Gamma World what it is, and that's I think honestly what kind of how it suffered as the editions came out and they kept trying to keep it relevant is Gamma World doesn't need to make sense, um, and it you don't want to turn it into something like an ultra gritty Last of Us. I mean, the most downtrodden I would go with, and gritty I would go with Gamma World would be like the Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome, Fury Road, that kind of stuff. Um, but I would tend to not go as far as the original Mad Max. Hardware, if you've ever seen Hardware, that's a good plot point for Gamma World. I mean, really, what do you have in Hardware? You have some Junktown human scrabbling out a life in a wasteland who finds a piece of old war tech, and comic hilarity ensues. Um, there's a lot to do in Gamma World because you have a world that was. We're not talking about a 1980s, 1990s, even near the 2000s world that fell. We're talking about essentially the Jetsons' future that fell into an apocalypse. That is what we're dealing with. So super ultra tech is there. You have all of this stuff to play with. And it's very clear that Earth was also part of, was not isolated. Earth was, at least the solar system was inhabited. So you could have visitors from off planet show up. You could have things fall out of orbit. You could have AIs that are on satellites that are communicating with people on the planet and being worshipped as gods. You could have all kinds of weirdness. You could potentially have aliens, and other games can be plugged into it. I already mentioned that, like the Metamorphosis Alpha, which is the precursor, the kind of the grandfather to Gamma World, written by the same guy, plugs into Gamma World well enough. You could also put Paranoia in Gamma World, because what is Paranoia would be a great enclave to have in Gamma World, a place where a supercomputer has taken over a population of cloned pure strain humans, and yeah, go from there. Let's see. Hercules, yeah. Let's take a look. Damnation Alley is a good one. I remember that was a lot of good stuff in there. Let's see. I would say a lot of places that you could probably look for Gamma World inspired stuff is a lot of Gold and Silver Age comics. Um, also, I mean, Kirby wrote a lot of good stuff. Uh, you know, future, like Commando or Commandar or whatever. Like, he's got his Future Men and all of that. Future Man stories were really popular during the Gold and Silver Age of comics. So, or maybe it's Bronze. I'm not too familiar. Basically, the early ages of comics. Let's see. Yeah, well, and finding starships is a thing that can happen. And in fact, like I said, the first edition reference game master screen that was released, the mini adventure, I love the fact that game master screens often came with adventures. It has you going to a space port. While you're not finding a spaceship that crashed, you are finding a spaceship. Um, and so, um, yeah, I I do think I'm going to be running Gamma World in the future. I don't know if it's going to be a pickup game that I do every so often on the Discord, or if I start a campaign there. But I really do want to go back, and I didn't get to play it enough back in the day, and I really would like to try playing it again. Um, so I think it is a situation where I am going to probably put something together, and then I will let folks know. I may run it open table style, depending on the setup I go for. If I'm going to start with the starting enclave, that's pretty well established. Open table really lends itself well because people can come and go, and then we're going to go out to those ruins out there, or we're going to go visit that valley, or there's some arcs that are you know giving us trouble. We got to deal with them. That lends really well to that. But it's also really appealing to have a set group that is wandering and experiencing things and trying to find stuff. A modern animated series that comes to mind real quick that dovetails really well into Gamma World is Kippo. It's Kippo. Um, Very Gamma World in its stylings. Um, but I am past my hour. There is not 2 hours worth of Gamma World to talk about unless folks have questions and comments. So I'm going to open it up here. If anybody has any specific questions they've been sitting on, or they want to ask me anything, or any comments about the stream, questions about my intentions on the Discord, lay it on me. I got a couple more minutes. But if not, then I'm going to probably bounce out of here and go get breakfast. Yeah, I mean, going back to this comment, it is sad that a lot of the stuff was not very good. Um, I also don't think that the genre itself lends well to a heavy duty fiction. Um, Funny you should mention Omega World. I'm pretty sure there was a product released at some point by that title. Let me take a look here. We're going to go ahead and real quick check on a few things here. Look at my lore. Let's see. Through the editions. No. Omega World would be the end of the world, wouldn't it? But, it's clear though. I think Kippo is Kippo. I believe it's on Netflix. But or was on Netflix. It's clear that Gamma World's name, at least to me, is derived from Metamorphosis Alpha. I think that they were very much playing off of that. There were a good number of modules released for Gamma World. I will say that. So first edition had GW1 Legion of Gold, which is really neat, is because it's written by Gary and Luke Gygax. The adventure. I recently watched a YouTube video that's talking about how um, the idea for Legion of Gold came from Luke Gygax watching an episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, or Challenge of the Super Friends, or something like that. Um, and where they had guys in gold armor busting through walls. And if you look at the Legion of Gold module cover, that's what it is. But it's just neat that Gygax and his son made that. Let's see, GW2 Famine at Fargo was, let's see, then we have the referee's screen. Famine at Fargo is interesting because it has weird mutant chickens. Yeah. So it's a fun one. But let's see. So we had those two for first edition. Second edition comes out with GW3 cleansing the cleansing war of Garrick Blackhand, excuse me. And then we have the Mind Masters GW4, GWAC1, that was just the referee's screen, and then character sheets. Third edition, we had Alpha Factor, Beta Factor, Gamma Base, Delta Fragment, and Epsilon Cyborgs. Definitely a shift in the titling of the modules. I do think it's neat that they kept the module numbering consistent through the third edition, because they just pick up, they leave off at GW4, the Mind Masters. Don't see a GW5, but that might be a sample module inside one of the other things. But then they just go to 6 and 7, 8, 9, 10. Fourth edition starts retitling them, or relabeling them. Oh, there is Omega World 2002. Omega World, a D20 system mini game based on Gamma World and written by Jonathan Tweet, was published in Dungeon 94, Polyhedron 153. Tweet does not plan an expansion for the game, although it is received warm reception Gamma World fans. So yes, there was an Omega World. It just wasn't part of the official edition cycle. Yeah. So anyways, that... Yeah, so I think GW2 assumes that you already you've played GW1, because GW1 is very much the Keep on the Borderlands for Gamma World. Legion of Gold sets you up with a countryside setting and an enclave. GW5 is Rapture the Deep. It's interesting. It's not listed here. Where did that come from? Where do you know where it was? Because I'm checking the wiki on here, and I'm not showing it. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay. For the Ghost second edition. Interesting. Oh, okay. They had been working title. The module was not published. Okay, that's why. That's interesting that they didn't publish GW5, but then they did publish GW6, 7, 8, and so why just not? If you had an unpublished module, why not come out and publish it? I guess. But all right. Anyhow, if anybody would like to play Gamma World, let me know in the comments. Or if you have any other questions about Gamma World, thoughts, memories, ideas about Gamma World, let me know. Also on the Discord, there is certainly, we have channels there for sci-fi role-playing. So if you want to get a conversation going about that, and let me know there's an interest. I am interested in running it. So that's definitely a possibility. If you find that PDF, Grumpy, can you help me out with that and let me know? I'll look for it too, but if you can find it, let me know, because I'd like to get a hold of it. I don't run a lot of published material, but I will say one thing that Gamma World was notorious for is presenting new stuff in its modules. So in addition, just like D&D, you'd get new magic items and new monsters and stuff. Gamma World would come out with new mutations, new pieces of equipment and stuff. So it's worth picking up the modules for that expanded information. I'm going to go ahead and thank everybody who came on and hung out. I'm really sorry that I didn't catch the chat problem early on. Mage's Musings has an amazing channel. I've said it before, said it again. I'll keep saying it until he blushes so red that he turns purple. And then the Old Geek, I know you're hiding around here somewhere. Yogg's channel is kind of where I think we all come from anyways. Let's see. Didn't see any other channel folks besides Hungar. Hungar was in here for a brief moment. He said, hey, hope you're feeling all right. But yeah, so like, share, and subscribe. get the word out. If you are not active on the Discord, remember I do have a Discord. I mean, I know I cross pollinate a lot of my thinking and thoughts out to Geeks channel, but there is an Elf Bait Discord, and I do post articles, little essays and stuff there, thoughts on gaming of all sorts, miniatures, role playing, even some rants, and always looking for conversation and feedback. Yogg, never heard of him? See, I have a feeling that if we end up playing, if I can never, I'll never be able to get him to play Gamma World because he doesn't do sci-fi. But if he ever did, his character would probably be a mutant named Yogg. I guarantee you. But with that, folks, thank you all for showing up. I do have, I believe next Sunday, I'm going to be doing a stream on, is it next Sunday? It's the 11th, whenever that is, because time. I'm going to be doing a live character generation for the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game from 1984. The classic face rip. Figured I'd show off character generation and just kind of how easy it is, and sort of talk about some of the ins and outs and foibles of that system. But y'all have a good Sunday. I'm going to go grab some breakfast, and I'm out.